Sam, I know you've been following up with some of those late deciders in 2016, the voters who waited until the last minute to pick a candidate. For some, it was that October surprise by FBI Director Jim Comey that swayed their choice, but it seems like you found that wasn't the whole story.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to sort of try and test the theory that Comey was the decisive factor, as the Clinton campaign has argued. And so we solicited a reaction from people who decided in the last week who they're for. And Comey definitely played a role for some of these people, but it wasn't necessarily the determinative role that is being portrayed. There were a lot of sort of random and arbitrary factors that led to people's voting behaviors. For instance, we talked to someone who, assumed that Hillary Clinton would launch a war in the Middle East, and so couldn't wrap his head around voting for her, so voted for Trump. That was a Bernie Sanders supporter. We talked to a person in Florida who was disgusted by both candidates and just decided to vote Republican and write Paul Ryan's name in. But then he did it because he thought that Hillary Clinton had it in the bag. And now that he's reflecting on his election, he said, if I knew now if I knew then what I know now, I certainly would have voted for Hillary Clinton. Other people looked at different factors. Someone was mad at how the media was treating Donald Trump after the Billy Bush tape. They thought they were piling on him, and so that actually he felt empathy for Trump in that moment and was driven towards him. So there's a whole host of random, arbitrary things that factor into voter behaviors, and it ended up creating this stew that allowed Donald Trump to be elected.
But as you know, Casey, having spent so much time around the Clinton campaign, they believe with all their hearts that as close as the margins were in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan, fewer than 80,000 votes determining those states, that Jim Comey was the deciding factor.
They do, and they will also say that, okay, we could have done 1,000 things differently. Right. We could have, make one tweak there, put Bernie Sanders on the ticket, spend, 2 more days in Wisconsin, or 2 days at all in Wisconsin. And
I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying this is what they really believe.
Right, and it is very much, you are right, and they deeply kind of have internalized this. And I think there is very much a sense of, we were talking about how the president feels about this. The Clinton campaign very much believed that Donald Trump's election would be apocalyptic for the country, for the Democratic Party, and there was, from the very beginning, when it became clear that he was going to be the nominee, a sense that they better not mess it up, because the consequences were going to be much different than if, say, they were running against Jeb Bush. And the reality is, their mistakes were made, and they lost. And there's been a lot of kind of grappling with what role the campaign may have played in that. I'm not sure. They seem to have settled on Comey as the reason. I'm not convinced it's the only one.
Well, I just want to say Comey was definitely a factor, and you can argue that in an election with 80,000 vote difference in 3 states, that he played a huge role. The bigger point I was trying to get with talking to these voters, why was she in the place where she was vulnerable to that to begin with?
Right.
And there was a whole host of strategic decisions that were made. There were a whole host of outside factors that contributed to this. And for a lot of these late deciding voters, it was an aggregation of that, not a simple Comey decision that ended up affecting how they voted.
Or perhaps they were spending a bunch of ad money in places like Georgia and Arizona late in the game instead of in Wisconsin. All right, coming up, we remember the life of Carrie Fisher, who was